Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the webcast, and welcome to Opportunity at Work and to Accenture coming together to release a landmark report with a lot of help from a lot of great friends, both here in Washington, D.C., but also across the country. My name is Marty Rodgers, and I have the distinct privilege and honor of welcoming everybody here today and everybody virtually today to our meeting and to a great series of conversations and panels and discussions around a really seminal and important report that is being released today, and we'll talk more about that in greater detail. We are housed today, and we are getting together to get today in Accenture's and Accenture Federal Services Innovation Studio. It is a digital innovation studio here in Washington, D.C. It brings together our best and brightest to help primarily public sector clients envision the best employee and the best citizen experiences on the planet. And that's the purpose of this center that we are gathered. It brings together the latest, greatest in terms of technology as well as talent. It is focused on inclusion and on diversity and on equality. And it is a place and a space where the best minds can create, can innovate, and can come together to envision a better future. And in many respects, that's the purpose of our meeting today. So this place where we are housed represents the future that we envision moving forward and that the report speaks to. There's a really powerful idea that has throughout time, we have talked about the North Star and about people envisioning a North Star, about people following a North Star. One of my heroes in life, Frederick Douglass, named his paper The North Star. Well, the North Star pointed a way to a better future, a brighter future. It pointed a direction towards opportunity and towards hope and towards possibility and towards freedom. In many respects, today we are talking about many stars, stars that we refer to as 71 million stars. And those stars aren't away from us. They're right here, right now, right in front of us, and they offer similar potential, similar possibility, similar opportunity for our employers here in the U.S. to really make a material difference in terms of the talent gap and talent shortages that we face. They offer an opportunity around bringing additional innovation to our workplaces and about bringing additional diversity, both in terms of ethnic diversity, but also in terms of diversity of experience that is going to be vital for our companies to be able to innovate and to advance in the future. And so I am particularly delighted and honored to have been part of this report and the generation of this report. It is really important for our country and for our society. We have to be about inclusive growth. We have to be about responsible growth, and we have to be about ethical growth. And so, again, my honor to welcome everybody to the Accenture Innovation Studio today. And then my next privilege is actually to welcome and introduce a good friend and a good colleague, and also one of the leading minds in the space of workforce and workforce development. Somebody who's been studying the issues around the gig economy, around the changing nature of our economy, about our ability to compete as a region, but also as a country, who is one of the best and brightest and most compassionate minds about what the workforce of the future has to look like and what is going to be necessary for us to compete in the years ahead. And so with that, the senior senator from the Commonwealth of Virginia, Mark Warner. much better than the shoe. Much better than the shoe hit.
Yes, exactly.
Well, thank you, Marty. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for your great work and Accenture's great work. I mean, some of the ideas I'm going to be talking about in a few moments. Marty and his team were early contributors, early workers, and helped, frankly, gin up a lot of these ideas. Let me also thank my dear friend Byron, Auguste, and everybody at Opportunity at Work for the great work that's gone into this study. This is a critically important time. And while this was not how we were originally planning on doing this event, and it's going to be a little more difficult for me on some of my factoids that I may have here. I can't hide the fact that I've got a cheat sheets, but so be the case. But in many ways, and I'll get to this in a moment, on a lot of the issues, particularly around gig workers, particularly around workers with no social insurance. Byron, Marty, others have been talking about the notion that this part of our economy may be doing on a current cash flow basis. But I've always said that when stuff hits the fan, as it always does, these folks will have nothing to fall back on. Now, I would have never predicted that it would have been a pandemic that would have been this initial stuff hitting the fan, but it is happening real time for literally millions and millions of workers right now. And one of the reasons why I'm going to make this presentation and then zip back to my day job, Congress may, at least the House will, and I would hope the Senate will, if need be, stay in session to take up these issues to make sure that we give that immediate relief to the literally tens of millions of Americans that over the coming days and weeks may be hit with the kind of lack of ability to work or self-quarantine or industries that are being disproportionately affected. And we need to be there for them in a way that targets that relief, particularly in the first stage of this crisis, to the affected workers and their families. But back to the main event, and that main event is the release of this STAR report that highlights this category of workers who have been able to acquire skills not necessarily through traditional means. And for literally decades, many of us in policymaking roles have made the comments that, the path to a good life in America doesn't necessarily have to be through a traditional four-year college. We've talked about it, but we've not really put the kind of rigor and study into showing that that is actually taking place and that wide swaths of the American workforce falls into that. It falls into that cohort. With this report, 71 million workers, a huge portion of our workforce who are skilled through alternative routes. And we've got to make sure that we continue to advance that and lay out other alternatives. As I mentioned, we're seeing some of those workers being hit with the coronavirus right now, an area that I focused on in gig workers and the failure to have any kind of benefit background. The good news is that we have been in contact with many of those platform companies. They are making initial first steps. And while I appreciate the fact that there may be a couple weeks of paid leave for folks who get the coronavirus or who are forced into quarantine, that is necessary but not sufficient. So my appeal to the platforms is work with us, work with others. There is more to be done. And I would argue that we're not asking for anything rash, that most of the immediate time of post-World War II capitalism in this country, there was a type of capitalism that I would call more stakeholder capitalism, simply rather than shareholder-only focused capitalism, where for literally decades, when capitalism took in America more people out of poverty than at any point. And again, it was a capitalism that still was not fair on a racial basis, that was not fair on a sexism basis, but still, and gross numbers took literally millions out of poverty. It was a capitalism that where companies were able to say, yes, I want to do well for my shareholders, but I also want to do well for my stakeholders, my employees, the community we're vested in. And candidly, I think we need, at a macro level, to get back to that. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But as we all know, and partially driven by technology, partially driven by the speed of the movements of capital, that kind of capitalism got replaced by an enormous, and I would argue, disproportionate focus on shareholder value only, and in particular, short-term shareholder appreciation. That would take precedence over anything else. And increasingly, companies focused, in terms of the workforce, only on those workers that were absolutely core to their mission. And consequently, every other job, and disproportionately these jobs are low and moderate income jobs, got basically outsourced either literally or figuratively. Outsourced abroad or outsourced where someone that was a prior worker within the company structure became a outside consultant or contractor, which sounds good at the first blush, but in reality proved to be an awful outcome. And I still think about the story back in the New York Times a couple years ago about, I think most of us who follow this space probably remember reading it, about the two janitors. One lady who started as a janitor at Kodak. While she was a Kodak employee, she continued to be a janitor, learned skills, got the benefits of being a Kodak employee, and literally ended her career as the CTO of Kodak. Somebody that came in at one of the lower rungs in the corporate structure, would not have been normally tracked to even get into management, let alone senior management, but her skills were able to shine through, and she became that success. On the other hand, a company that we all salute and applaud, Apple, took that same janitor a number of years back, and or that same classification of janitor, and said, we're not going to make you an Apple employee with all the benefits and opportunities that come with that. You're going to be an outside contractor. And they took an Apple janitor that had been almost the same equivalent amount of time working for Apple. And unfortunately, the story was this individual was making only a few dollars more per hour, literally 15 to 20 years into employment, and had no benefits, had no additional training, had no security. That's not fair. It's not right. And I think it, again, drills home this report that if we're going to make sure there's any level of opportunity, equality of opportunity, we really have to take a look at this star cohort of workers in our workforce. And the challenge particularly is that of this 71 million, about 18 million, based upon the good work of this report, are workers that have actually acquired additional skills through these alternative routes. So they have acquired the skills that should put them higher in the food chain in terms of pay, benefits, and responsibility. That is a great talent that at this point is, for the most part, being ignored by corporate America. That is a mistake. Matter of fact, just 5 million, 1 in 3 of those folks that have acquired the additional skills have moved out of low and moderate income jobs into high wage jobs. Yet there's still this cohort with people with additional skills that aren't getting recognized. We've got to make sure that we do a better job of that mismatch. So I applaud the report and all the work. I know we've got a lot of folks in this room here who did the hard work to give us this data that I hope to take up to Congress, to my colleagues in Congress, and share with them. This is an issue that has no Democrat or Republican or left-right. This makes moral sense. It makes economic sense. We all know one of the real challenges has been how we meet the human capital needs to the business needs. Well, we've got some examples right here. And one of the things that I think the report pointed out is a lot of the inefficiencies and barriers to those 12 million folks who've already got the skills, or the literally close to 55 million Americans that are in this category that could be on the pathway to those skills if we can get rid of some of those economic inefficiencies. So whether that is Pell Grant for industry certifications, whether that is tools to make sure that we provide more training in the workplace, whether it is valuing skills that someone may have acquired in the military before they come into the corporate world. There are a host of tools that this report points out that I think that we need to grapple with. Final comment I want to make is just this. And Byron and I did a brief conversation on this before I came up. While I applaud the work that was in this document, and I again intend to take it and share it with my colleagues, I do think for a moment, as we look at how, from a public policy standpoint, we deal with some of the constraints that our economy faces. We have this moment, unpredicted as it was, with not only a healthcare crisis, but a healthcare crisis that I think is morphing into an economic crisis. My hope is that certain basic rights, like paid sick leave, will become a reality in the immediate short term for example, coming out of this crisis. But I also hope there will be a little more emphasis right now that we take a step back and with the presidential elections in front of us, but hopefully in a bipartisan way, say, how can we make modern American capitalism actually work for more people? Let me leave you with 3 quick areas that I would hope could be subject to further discussion and study. First, and I've mentioned this around the gig workforce, but it's much larger than the gig workforce. Wide swaths of the American workforce today are not going to work in traditional employment in a single job. I always point out the way my dad did for 38 years in the same company. He never made a lot of money, but with that job came certain security in terms of health care, retirement, and if he lost those jobs, unemployment, workman's comp, and disability. We need to switch an economy to create a portable benefit system so that from the first dollar you make, and no matter what income stream, some portion of that income stream is set aside for benefit buckets that travel with you that you can aggregate throughout your working career. Second, I think we need to fundamentally change. This is something Marty has helped me think through. Fundamentally change the way we think about tax, accounting, and reporting treatment of investment in human beings. Right now, we have a tax, accounting, and reporting structure that disproportionately favors capital or disproportionately favors research and development over investment in human beings. And if we're going to take a lot of folks that may not have traditional skills and continue to upskill them during their career, we're going to need to change that. So I would argue the current circumstance where a company can go out and spend $5,000 on a robot and get an R&D tax credit for that robot, have that robot count as an asset on your balance sheet, and that robot accrues to the overall value of your company, that's fine. But why shouldn't we at least treat, if a company spends $5,000 and takes 2 human beings, folks that may fall into this star category, take the skills they've already acquired, but also increase their skill structure so they become more efficient than the robot? Why shouldn't they get the same tax treatment? So I've created an R&D tax credit to focus on human capital development. I think we need to recognize that public companies ought to report their investment in human capital, and the SEC started down that path. And I even think we need to grapple with the accounting industry to think about investment in human beings as an asset class that can be reflected on the balance sheet. And then finally, the topic I touched on at the outset, and that is to have a meaningful conversation. And Accenture has been one of the leaders on this, to realize that if we move from the current enormous focus on shareholder capitalism back to what I think could be a broader-based, more inclusive form of capitalism, stakeholder capitalism, that could end up inuring to all our benefit. It says, still make money for your shareholder, but also do well by your employee and your community. And I want to commend not only Accenture's work, but the whole Business Roundtable in terms of raising these issues. Now they put the letter out. We need to make sure that that letter comes with actual structural changes, and that's going to require legislative as well as corporate action. And I look forward to working with the folks in this room and the folks who are watching this webcast to see how we can make that part of the agenda, particularly as we go into this presidential election season and hopefully afterwards. Again, my thanks to all of you who put together this incredibly important report. I want to make sure, again, I share it with my colleagues, and my apologies for the old talking and running. We've got some votes up on the floor right now that actually may be more meaningful than a lot of what the Senate's done over the last few months. So thank you again very much, and thanks for having me. And I will exit stage left. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, guys. Thanks. That was a little hard to do with,
Good morning.
And I serve as our lead on our insights and research work at Opportunity at Work. I came to Opportunity at Work having spent many years in the corporate world working with executives in the Fortune 500. We spent a lot of time thinking about talent management strategies there, how to think about your workforce to optimize for what your business needed, right? It's been really fascinating to come to Opportunity at Work now and start to bring the lens of the labor force to that understanding, and also the lens of the worker. I'm really excited to share some of the insights from the report with you all today. The team with Accenture has just been fantastic to work with, and I'm excited to share these findings. Before I do that, though, I actually want to kick us off with kind of a moment of inspiration that has really continued to inspire us at Opportunity at Work.
It's time that we change the way that we define talent. I'm LaShawna Lewis. I am CEO of Ellen Lewis Consulting. I don't have a college degree, but I'm a computer geek.
LaShawna grew up in East St. Louis. She had a passion for computers, but she wasn't able to get a college degree. And because she didn't have a college degree, she couldn't even get an interview for a tech job, despite her coding skills. So she was working as a bus driver.
I've been working on computers since I can remember, but I always found myself in low-wage jobs. And then I always got pulled into doing jobs and duties that are mid to high salary range. So I was able to find a program called Launch Code to help me. And from that, I ended up getting a full-time position at MasterCard, working as an engineer there. After MasterCard, I did start my own business, but at the same time, I got offered a position as a CTO of a startup and director of aerospace IT at a different startup. Not everyone has a four-year degree or can afford a four-year degree, but everyone should have an opportunity. So maybe we need to look past the pedigree and look more at the skill base. And that's what the STARS movement drives home. STARS are skilled through alternative routes. There are millions of stars like me just waiting to work, and all they need is an opportunity. Let someone take the first step in changing your company or your organization into something that's more aligned to where the future is going to be. My name is LaShawna Lewis, and I'm a star. Value potential over pedigree and join the STARS movement.
We're so delighted LaShawna could be here with us today. We're going to turn the conversation over to her after we cover these insights and the rest of the panel. I'm going to dive in. I'm going to dive into some of the content that you'll find in the report today, and I want to share some of the data that we found really exciting. I was surprised, and I think most of us on the team were surprised to learn that 74% of jobs created between 2008 and 2017 were jobs where employers typically require a four-year college degree. Now, many of you may not be surprised, if you've been working in this space, to know that more than 60% of individuals in our active labor force today do not have a college degree. So we had a situation where 60% of the workforce had access to only 26% of new jobs being created, right? So when you talk to employers, they're experiencing frustration, right? We can't find the workers we need for the jobs we need to fill. When you talk to workers, and we talked to dozens this fall, both in interviews and focus groups, they're also feeling deeply frustrated, right? They know they have the skills to do more than they're being given the opportunity to do in a lot of their jobs today, and they're not giving access to those jobs themselves, right? So that was actually a lot of the reason we started to do this work. Could we actually understand, of the population of workers who do not have a four-year degree today, do some of them have the skills that American businesses are looking for? This was the fun part, right? Designing how do we actually figure out if the workforce today that doesn't have a four-year degree actually does have the skills. The team at Accenture was so fun to work with on this because we really were committed to using public data sets to do this work. It was important to us that all of our findings could be replicated by other researchers. So we pulled data from the census, we were pulling data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the way we did this analysis was we looked at each worker, we understood what job that worker was in, and then based on the job, we understood from the Department of Labor and Bureau of Labor Statistics what skills are required of that job. And then one of the things we wanted to do was understand if someone has the skills required for that job, that is work experience that requires them to bring those skills to work. So let me talk you through this example you see on the page here. On the left-hand side, you see a list of skills that are associated with what is typically a low-wage job, a sales representative. That individual has to speak effectively, they have to be an active listener, they have to persuade, they have to have some level of social perceptiveness, and so on. Now, what was interesting to us is we wanted to understand, given the skills that are required of a sales rep, what other jobs exist in the economy today that also require similar skills. So we looked at more than 750 occupations in the US economy today, and we mapped them to each other occupation in the US economy to understand, are there skills overlaps in these pairings of occupations? What we found was there's actually a lot more overlap than I think a lot of us realize. So what you see on the page here is an example of a pairing. So on the right-hand side, you see an advertising sales agent. This is typically a job that is a middle wage role, and it's actually one that requires the same skills. There's slight differences in the importance of that skill for that job, but it's actually one that not only you see similar skills aligned to, but you actually see some members of our US economy today making transitions towards. So we actually studied across all occupations what other pairings might exist, and given the wages of workers, could we actually start to predict some transitions for them to other jobs? It was fascinating to us to see that, in fact, a lot of low-wage workers have skills that are relevant for middle-wage jobs and high-wage jobs. So this concept that the wages you earn are actually indicative of the skills you have was false. To us, that was a deeply important finding, right? We frequently conflate the wages you earn with the skills you have. And to us, this provided evidence to suggest that that's false. One of the important things we do want to point out is certainly college is a very important pathway, right, for a lot of workers in the United States to acquire skills. This, to us, shared with us that work experience is also important. A lot of workers are gaining the skills they need through the work they're doing today. We wanted to situate this in the broader envelope of the actual US labor force. So I'm going to talk you through some numbers here. Many of you know we have over 320 million individuals in our population today. About half of those individuals are not active in the workforce. So that's what you see on the left-hand side of the chart here. Included in that are children, retirees, and so on. On the left, yeah, sorry, I'm trying to adjust for the live stream. On the right-hand side of the chart here, you see the other half of the population, and these are members of the active US labor force today. Of the about 160 million individuals who are active in the labor force today, 60 million do have a college degree or some advanced degree. What we found was there are 71 million individuals who do not have a college degree, do have a high school diploma, and each one of them is in an occupation that requires skills where the skills can be applied to a job that pays a higher wage in their local market. These are the individuals we're calling stars. They're skilled through alternative routes. They have learned skills on the job, and we believe there's a lot of value in the skills they're learning in that work. It was interesting to us to actually start to understand this population of 71 million workers a little bit more. Certainly, we saw a lot of diversity within this pool. 50% of African Americans, 44% of Hispanics, 43% of non-Hispanic whites are stars in the US population today. But further, we found that stars actually are in all occupational categories in the US labor force today. We see that 56% of veterans are stars. It really is a diverse pool of talent that encompasses this 71 million. Now, it's a big number, and we wanted to better understand how can we start to think about interventions that might support stars in their career pathways. And so we developed a segmentation that was based on someone's readiness to do higher wage work. So what you see here are three categories that we defined within the report. The first are shining stars. There are 5 million stars today in high-wage jobs. These are individuals earning, on average, more than $77,000 a year. They are frequently in computer-related jobs. There are a lot of small business owners in this category as well. The next category that we define are a group we call rising stars. These are individuals who, based on the skills required of their current job, actually have the skills to do a significantly higher paid job than what they're doing today. On average, these workers could see an increase of 70% in their earnings based on just the skills they have today. Now, there are 30 million individuals in the US economy today that fit into this category, who have the skills to see transformative wage gains if they were given the opportunity and access to those jobs. Finally, the last category we define are a group we call forming stars. There are 36 million individuals in this category, and while many of them do have the skills to move to a higher wage role that pays at least 10% more than what they're earning today, for instance, a cab driver might be able to transition to a truck driver job, those transitions are not ones that would lead to transformative wage gains for this group. A lot of us in the workforce field are focused on forming stars today, right? How can we help give them the skills they need to change the trajectory of their career path? There are a lot of implications to these findings. We're going to talk a little bit more about them in the conversation on our panel in just a little bit, but we think it's important to point out that from Shining Stars, we actually have a lot to learn. Many of them face tremendous barriers to get to where they are today. A systematic study of what those barriers are would help us understand what we need to do to actually help them unleash their true potential. Further, I think many of them feel they could go even further if we were to remove barriers they're still facing in the labor market today. For rising stars, this is really a category of workers that we have not spent much time understanding as a researcher community, right? A lot of them have skills that American businesses are looking for today in their talent pipelines. What would it look like for us to improve access for them and actively build pipelines that include these stars? And finally, with forming stars, there's a lot more work to be done in taking some of the models that have really innovated on how to train active members of the workforce today. What would it look like for us to take some of those learnings and really scale it to the challenge, right? We have 36 million workers in this category. We detail a lot of calls to action in our report. For employers, we think it's important to continue to push on skills-based hiring. In addition to removing four-year degrees, what does it look like for employers to actively start to source this talent? The same way that a lot of employers go out and actively source from colleges and universities, what would it look like to bring the same level of deliberation to this talent pool? And finally, a lot of employers have stars on their teams. They know the power of this talent pool already. What does it look like to continue to invest in this group, right? To ensure that there are career pathways, that people are getting access to learn new skills and can continue to move up in their career path. For workforce development organizations, we found it a very compelling set of conversations in the fall with stars to actually hear their perspective on this term. A lot of them shared with us that they felt seen for the first time through this terminology. What would it look like for us as a field to actually adopt this language, really enable a whole new talent pool to achieve their potential in the labor market today? And finally, we'll talk a little bit about this later too. For analysts, for researchers, for policymakers, this was a first step in understanding this population. We did it with imperfect data. What would it look like for us to actually get better data about this population, not just so that we can understand them better, but also to be able to target interventions to support them more effectively in their journeys? With that, I'd like to turn it over to Byron Auguste, our CEO and co-founder of Opportunity at Work. He's going to lead a conversation about these implications in more detail. Thanks, Byron.
Thank you, Papia. I think I'd love to just ask all of our panelists to come up, and I'm gonna actually, rather than because I want to introduce the panel, and the theme of the panel, I think. We've learned a lot in this report, and we hope to build a real awareness of this the tremendous talent pool that stars represent. But we need to go past awareness, and we need to go from awareness to action. And it's a particular type of action we need, which is that we need action that is not just in one sector. It's very important companies can do a lot. It's very important training providers can do a lot. But if we can't connect the dots across these, if we can't open up the pathways from one to the other, and frankly the feedback from one to the other, right? So what do employers need from training providers? But what do training providers need from employers? So I think there's a lot of opportunities, and I'm just so excited about the panel we have that I really want to kind of move straight ahead to that. And I'm going to have some comments at the end. So can I ask everyone to come on up, and then I will introduce it. I'm going to sit there. Yeah. Okay. So I am going to, first of all, I want to introduce the panel, and I'll go to my left and across the board. So Lashana Lewis, who you've been introduced to in a way, leads LM Lewis Consulting to improve business diversity and inclusion efforts worldwide. And I met Lashana a few years ago, and her story, her insights were deeply influential with me. And I would say, Lashana, meeting you actually changed my own path and my own trajectory. So thank you for that. And then next, David Shaw, who's a talent executive at Accenture, our partners in developing this report. And Accenture, of course, is in an industry where talent is paramount. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from Dave about how this untapped talent pool, this enormous talent pool, how that plays out in a kind of a talent-intensive industry and beyond. And then next, Elizabeth Lindsay, who's the CEO of Bite Back, which is a terrific organization that trains stars and others, but for technical job roles here in DC and Baltimore. And I'm happy to say that Bite Back is one of the first training providers that Opportunity at Work will be working with on our Stars Talent Marketplace that will be launching in DC to actually help make these connections between mid-sized small businesses who want to hire stars and the training programs and the other kind of alternative routes there. And then Dan Bryant of Walmart, whose company must be the biggest employer of stars in the U.S. And Walmart has a number of work-in-progress initiatives to build opportunities and pathways for stars inside Walmart, and has been a great partner. And Dan emphasizes that these are work in progress, and we want to hear about the progress, but we really want to hear about the work and what needs to be done. And then Professor Peter Blair, an economist at Harvard's Graduate School of Education, who's been an extraordinarily engaged and inspiring member of what's already an all-star Stars Insights advisory panel that Opportunity Work put together to make sure that the caliber of the research reflected in this report could stand scrutiny, could give us real insight, and could provide the basis for building a new research agenda so we get better answers over the long haul. So I couldn't be more thrilled with this panel. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a conversation in the panel and a few questions that I'm going to pose. But then we were planning to have, if we were going to have everyone, we were going to have people here in person, we were planning to have kind of Q&A from the audience. So instead we've decided to keep our Q&A, but to have the panelists ask each other questions, because I think they reflect the full range of the institutions and individuals that need to solve this problem. And maybe they can learn something from each other, and we can all learn something together. So that's the goal. So I'm going to start out to ask each of you the why question first. Why do you think this topic matters to report? Like, what are the stakes for you, for your organization? And I want to start with you, Lashana, because I feel like the most underrated kind of learning in this entire field is learning from the actual experience of people who have both struggled with these barriers and particularly who've overcome them. So I'd love to hear from you first. Why does this matter? What is this about for you?
Well, the truth of it is that, I'm one of millions. So I'm not the only person that went through the pathway that I did or had the same experiences. So I know a lot of people probably expect me to think about me, because I'm like on the screen and telling stories and things like that. But in reality, I run into people on a daily basis, and I'm saying every single speaking engagement that I've done, which, thanks to what's happened since 2015, I've done a lot of speaking engagements. You got to look at me. I'm a nerd, okay? We don't talk to people. That is the thing that we're known for. But it gave me this platform to be able to kind of speak and tell my story, and every single time I would get no less than 3 people to come up to me and say, this is my story. My uncle went through this. I went through this. I know other people in my family that are going through this. What can I do? How can I change it? So, I mean, the importance of it is that it exists, and it's something that we need to kind of address, because now it's becoming so wide that we have hundreds of thousands of tech jobs that are just empty, that are sitting there, that are not getting filled with people who probably already had the skills, and they just needed to be matched up to be able to do that job with maybe a little extra training. And I say this to every single person. Every job I've ever had, you still need to train. You still need to do the learning portion. You still need to understand the ins and outs. Especially when I went to MasterCard, a lot of that was proprietary. There's no school that could have taught me anything about half of the systems that are there, because they were specially designed there. But I had a good basis. And there are a lot of people in the United States that have a good basis and can grow from there. And we just need to find another way to surface that.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. And so, Dave, I want to take it to you, because we talked, Lashana, you're talking about what happens when you get to a company, and what's the role of a company in training, and what's the role, just open the doors and the opportunity. Now, Accenture obviously is a huge talent business. You're particularly skilled, even internally, at sort of matching, skills and talent to task. How do you see this problem and the opportunity here?
Yeah, it's a great question. Our clients, most of our clients come to us looking for specific answers and most likely solutions around how to actually find and distribute the talent that they have into different jobs, because the talent basically is things that they can't really touch and feel. They need to actually build that talent. Specifically, companies that come to us with that intent are looking to actually source different pools of talent. And STARS actually is one of those pools of talent that is kind of unseen. And they need to actually open that up and drive a whole bunch of talent procurement, basically in a different way. Mm-hmm. Schools of thought around this go to really the fact that companies are lazy. They have job descriptions that really are actually focused on past job descriptions and not the skills that are really required for the jobs that they're going to put people into. And so therefore the better matching happens when the currency becomes skills themselves. So actually at Accenture, we're looking at how to actually match those skills and build those skills to put people in a position so they can actually seek and receive those job opportunities regardless of their background, and then obviously take the path that they need to take from that point forward.
That's great. So, Elizabeth, I mean, that's a nice setup for you, because, I mean, what you do is to kind of take people who clearly have a lot of potential, who often have a lot of skills, and give them the bridge, both the skill bridge and some of the access bridge to companies. And so how does this, does this matter for you, this kind of work, this kind of insight, and why?
This absolutely matters. When we look at our economy and how it's changed, the digitalization of the workforce has led to an increasing gap between those with skills that are recognized by employers and those who have incredible skills and that aren't recognized. And at Bite Back, we train hundreds of stars every year, people who have really hard jobs, like working in retail or food service, people who take care of their families. When I was looking at the wonderful data that Papia shared, I was thinking about my mom, who spent most of her life either in very low-wage careers or managing a household of 4 children on a very limited budget. When you think of that skill set, the value of that and how it was just completely undervalued. And at Bite Back, we see the potential. So we provide training and technology to stars of all ages, and we help them get industry-recognized certifications. And our students thrive. It is unbelievable. Like Lashana, I'm so just moved and amazed and inspired by your story. But once they have a little bit of training and support, they're able to move into incredible jobs in IT, in office settings where they are promoted, and on average they're making almost $28,000 a year more than they were before coming to Bite Back. I mean, they're moving into the middle class with training and support.
That's great. And Dan, some of the people doing hard jobs, right, are doing them at Walmart. And I mean, I think one of the things that's so interesting is how much you actually do learn. And Walmart's done more over time to both recognize that and build on it. But I mean, I think we still have a long way to go in this country. And you've said we have a long way to go in your company. How do you think about, what does this mean to you? Can this help on the journey, and how? What needs to happen?
Thank you, Byron. First, thank you. You and your extraordinary team here at Opportunity at Work. We are delighted to be partnering with you on this, so kudos. Senator Warner, wherever you are, thank you. Who kicked us off a few minutes ago. His leadership has been difference-making, and he really has created vital space in Congress and amongst a policy cohort to really try to get our act together. This matters profoundly to us because the stars are us in a real sense. I mean, each of the cohorts that are constituent parts of the 71 million are the backbone of Walmart. So we are being carried along by the 5 million high-skilled, high-wage cohort. We're being challenged to really think about how to do more with that 30 million cohort that have the skills but don't yet have the wages to match. And then how do we be meaningfully part of upskilling that remainder cohort? I mean, this is Walmart's future. To the extent that we succeed in tackling some of these fundamental workforce issues, we will succeed as a company in a highly competitive business arena, but we'll succeed in terms of the ethical sustainability of our company. We'll succeed as a company that really does need to be getting it right across different shareholders, different stakeholders, as Senator Warner so ably put it. The other thing I would commend about what you all have done here is so much of the challenge as we are here partnering with really thoughtful thought leaders and policy leaders related to workforce challenges and the future of the workforce. It's the common language problem, and you all are really taking a giant step forward, giving us a common language. Too often we are 100 people with good faith in a room together with 100 different languages. And it's so hard then to agree on vocabulary and linguistic rules so that we can do this better to get to better economic and workforce outcomes. So you all have taken a giant step forward in terms of helping us with a common vernacular that I think accelerates our getting to actions and solutions.
Thank you. Peter, you are an economist and a physicist in your spare time. I mean, you've got the biggest of big pictures here. Does this kind of work make a difference? And what do you see as the potential?
It is phenomenal to be here with all of you. This work is incredibly important on a national, even an international scale, but also on a personal scale too. Byron, you and I were talking about this, and as I was preparing to come here from Boston amidst everything that's going on, I started to think, I'm a star too, in the sense that I went to community college. So right now I'm a professor at Harvard University, an affiliate at the National Bureau of Economic Research, but I went to community college. And I remembered how some folks looked at me when they saw that, and how that changed when I went to Duke. And that was one of the things that really got me to think a lot about education, because oftentimes we conflate education with pedigree. And so I'm deeply personally drawn to this work from my own experience. And I think one of the reasons why it's important to have such a broad collaboration of folks who have experience in policy, in industry, and also people who themselves are stars is because we can get to see a broad picture of all of the stakeholders. And this is what Senator Warner was saying, right? Because it's not enough for academics to sit in our offices and to write papers in a way that's disconnected from what the specific concerns of the economy are. It's not enough for business leaders to think about how do they solve their own business problem without thinking about how that fits into the broader conversation about what's happening with the economy and how are we training people for the long haul too. And so in a lot of ways, I think what's been valuable to me about this work is the way in which we all have a part to play in terms of this kind of stakeholder view of capitalism. And I think it's important to get academics on board precisely because we are at the forefront of the traditional ways in which folks are trained. I'm at an educational school. And so this is deeply personal for us. I'm also at the oldest school in the US, Harvard University. And so we should be taking a lead on this in a way that's going to be important for shaping these sorts of conversations.
Well, in that spirit, I want to get down to some brass tacks. Like, we're not going to sort of figure out every problem here, and certainly not every solution. But I'd love to hear, like, what barriers or what problems, like, why, like, we just heard from a bunch of people here representing lots of different fields who want to get this right, who think it's important to do. What's stopping us, right? Like, what barriers are we hitting? And I think it's important to surface those honestly, so that then we can figure out how to get at it. I don't know, Lashana, if you want to start from like just like some of the specifics, and we can just sort of talk about how it's being seen from different perspectives.
Sure. I think you kind of hit something on the note when you're saying the laziness, the going and just using something that was already done before and just kind of plastering it on and trying to move on and get things going.
So like the job descriptions.
Yeah, the job descriptions, and just saying, okay, it's the same thing, or going and asking the other people who work that job and say, well, what do you have? Oh, okay, well, all you guys have bachelor's degrees, so that must be what is needed. And it's just like, no, actually sit down and take the time and look at this and see how is it instrumental in either blocking or allowing certain people to be able to transition. We think about things like, I remember there used to be full service gas stations. I just kind of aged myself. So, but I remember.
Not if you're from New Jersey.
Exactly. But I remember full service gas stations, and there were attendants that would come out and they would check all the different things and things like that. And now full service gas stations are, few and far between, except for New Jersey. So, but you didn't hear this, huge outcry. It was like, what's happening with all the people who used to work full service? It's like they transitioned into doing another job. Those skills were useful somewhere else. And I think we have stopped doing that for some reason. There is a reason, and now it's just like, how do we figure out what that reason is, and then yank at it and say, you know what, we need to stop doing whatever this is and actually look at people as human beings that can change and want to learn. They're not computers, they're not mechanic systems. They aren't designed just for one thing. And I think we've gotten into that mentality. So now once we start to address something like that and say, you know what, this human being probably, they were okay with doing full service because that was what was accessible at the time. But now, let's say, hey, what do you think about this? This seems to kind of apply and have the same kind of mechanisms of thinking that was similar to what you did. What do you think about something like that? And 9 times out of 10, whenever I talk to someone about what I do in computers, they're in some sort of other industry. And they were like, I always wanted to try coding, but I was afraid because that's a change. And people were like, you've been doing X, Y, Z for so long. Why do you want to do this? So it's like, twofold. People want to change. We just have to kind of accept that and then try to build things moving forward to help it be a lot easier for them.
That's great.
Yeah, I think it would be great to build on actually that question because, for example, Dave, I mean, like Accenture in assessing skills internally, right, is like must be very sophisticated and have lots of different ways of doing it. But then and it's true of some other companies too. But like, so why this like laziness? Like, why is the job description this cut and paste thing? It's like, oh, you need a bachelor's degree. Like, bachelor's degree is 18,000 different things. It's not even a thing.
Yeah. Right.
So how could it be that, like, that's what you need for, like, that just seems, you used the word lazy. I mean,
I did.
I could use the word, I could use the word sort of stupid, right? I mean, it's like, what, does that make any sense? No, but seriously, but it's done, so it must be for a reason, but why is that?
It's a good problem. I probably answered your second question with my first answer with barrier. I believe there's 2 other barriers as well as the laziness and job descriptions. I think the currency that we're going to deal with is skills, and so therefore one of the most important things that we need to do is not be lazy to have a machine learning or AI tool screen a resume that then screens out somebody that doesn't have an educational background instantaneously. So letting a computer decide who has good computer skills has nothing to do with that. what we need to do is figure out a different way to demonstrate and actually pull those skills to the forefront. Whether that person gets the job or not, maybe not, but more importantly, at least they're in the pool of applicants that actually make sense. So I believe that one of the ways that we can think about that is how we gamify. And gamify doesn't necessarily mean like, play Fortnite. Gamify means basically put people into a position where they can demonstrate the skills that they have and how adjacent those skills might be to jobs of the future. And when we do that, I think what we actually open up is not what's on a piece of paper that you earned 4 years at a school, but really where you are relative to the skills that are required for that job. And we can do that today and do that really fairly in a very unbiased way, and that allows that pool to be richer. The aperture grows with that type of result. I think that's a really good thing to think about.
I think that sounds amazing. I think one of the barriers that LaShawna was speaking to a bit is also the psychological impact of being someone who has talent that's not recognized at all. And with our Bite Back adult learners, we often see folks who are coming in with a real lack of confidence because they are operating in a society that says unless you have a bachelor's degree, then your work and your brilliance is worth less. I also think, in addition to the algorithms, I'm really glad you mentioned that because computers can't read even, looking at someone's applying for an IT job and they might have worked helping their neighbor's computers, right? Computers can't read that. I also think there are just so many deep barriers related to people who are living in poverty. So what we see is that no matter how excited someone might be about coming to Bite Back for training, if they can't afford a Smart Trip card to get to class, if they don't have child care and their child is sick and they can't afford someone to come in, housing is such a huge one as well. And so I think when we're thinking about STARS, we really need to think holistically. How do we support them not just on the training, but on their lives so that they can participate in this training and move into jobs?
I think we need, LaShawna, Elizabeth, computer savvy systems thinkers to help us here. We have a big collective action problem, which is that it's so hard to quantify the range of activities that make up the range of skills that have significant value and that need to be recognized as essential and valuable. It's so hard to quantify that across the full continuum of skills being deployed in the subsidiary activities that make up those skills. So we really do need to do some serious crunching to understand all of those different skills, their dimensions, the subsidiary activities, and standardize that to the greatest degree possible. To your point, think of how hard it has been for, millennia or at least centuries to figure out what a BA or a BS means coming out of a 4-year college. And we've been doing that actually for centuries, and we still don't have clarity. So in a sense, let's give ourselves a little bit of breathing room. This is hard. But the great thing is to see this accelerating consensus that a skills orientation and validating a skills mastery of a certain level is the better way for business and policymakers and society to move. So that consensus is now forming is invaluable. We continue to think about access, stability, and mobility, and defining the degree to which we are making progress as a company against, are we driving down those gratuitous barriers to entry in terms of the formal economy? Secondly, stability. How can we build in greater stability? To Elizabeth's observations just now of all of the obstacles that have to be overcome by so many that really can be enormously valuable in the workforce. And then thirdly, how can we become that truly effective, always-on training platform? In a sense, Walmart has become the largest always-on training organization in the world that happens to sell a lot of stuff. We've moved 500,000 people through different channels of upskilling and training over the last 3 years because we have to own this imperative just as it relates to to really taking care of our workforce and benefiting optimally from our workforce.
Right. Peter, you're listening to all this, and I know how you take things in so quickly and extensively, but there must be barriers to researchers, to the academy. Why isn't research contributing more to this right now? And what needs to change for that to help, for it to be more part of the solution?
Yeah, this is a really rich conversation. Whenever you see me looking down, that means I'm thinking. I'm trying to use all my faculties to focus. In a way, the NBR working paper that we did was precisely to speak to that gap, right? So we have two differentiated products. We have this product, which is the policy document that somebody who wants the headlines can read. It's 5 pages, it's very succinct, nice figures. And then we have the academic paper that says, how can we situate the findings of this report within the context of a literature so that somebody who is going to do a 5-year PhD and then have a 30 or 40-year research career would actually say, I want to devote my life to thinking about these sorts of questions. Something that's really powerful is most people who go on to do PhDs, for the most part, they want to change the world. They want to do research that they think is really important. Now, to get there, you have to develop a certain set of skills. And what could happen at the end of that 5-year period is that you could lose a vision for like why you came to do the work, and you can gain this deep love for the skills, right? And so specifically thinking about barriers through the lens of the report that we put together, the NBR working paper that we put together, was to really say, well, why might it be the case that there exist folks who have the relevant skills, like Papia said, but then they're working in jobs where they're earning lower wages? Well, it could be that firms are rationally inattentive. They're just used to looking in particular labor markets, and there's cost to like learning how the skills of somebody who might be a homemaker balancing a tight budget could map into a job in another context. And so in a sense, there's a whole literature about rational inattention. There's a whole literature about behavioral economics that we can then tether these findings to. And so an academic who's been trained to respond to that literature and to think about these questions within that framework, all of a sudden, it's about something specific that they have been trained to think about, right? And so Lashana's story is going to grip the general public in a particular way, and then thinking about how we translate that story into like a language that an academic can understand can then give them, it can help them to see how their tools can be responsive to the very important questions that we face in the US labor market. And so that's really the goal of the academic piece of the work that we've done.
And so I want to ask, before we go into you asking each other questions, I guess my last question is, what makes you think we can solve this problem? I guess, what gives you hope as you sit here?
For me, we have to solve it. Yeah. We have to solve it. There are too many, 71 million, it's a lot. We have to solve the problem. So it's not, for me, an if, it's a when.
I think there's 3 actors in this play. I think companies seek better pools of talent to actually absorb and hopefully create the mobility for themselves to new business models. The second actor is the communities that we all live in are really impacted by not solving this issue. And so therefore it becomes something that Lashana basically says we have to. And I think the third actor is the individuals. The people want a better set of opportunities. And so by actually activating the way that we perceive their skills to be valuable and actually allowing them to actually seek that out, we are actually giving them a new platform for growth. And so I think those 3 actors in the play are all kind of looking at the same thing together, and I think that because of that, that's what's gonna help it.
I feel really hopeful that Walmart is here and that Accenture is here, that there are employers who really believe in this right now. It's felt for a few years that we've really been kind of swimming upstream as providers, so it's really exciting.
I would echo all of the above. We have to. And the upsides, the commercial benefit upsides for companies that do this better than those that don't are real. I mean, there's a premium to be had here in the marketplace for companies that do a better job of figuring out how to upskill effectively and tap into upskilled people in the marketplace. So I think the economics are going to lead more and more of us to this place, but we have to do it with really smart people who are helping us develop that common framework.
Peter?
From where I sit, I think that one of the reasons why I'm hopeful is that we all have a stake in this for like different reasons. So as an educator, I have a stake in it because that's my job, is to really see young people grow and develop and thrive. For business leaders, this is really important, both for you being able to produce goods and services, but also to produce the people that are going to purchase your goods and services as well too, right? And as a broader society, like there's, in a sense, a collective arrangement that we've all made to like live and to do life together. And if you look at the way in which we're responding to the current crisis with the coronavirus, like everyone's like just, we're fist bumping, we're like doing the things that we need to do to make sure that the disease doesn't spread. And so for different reasons, we're all invested in solving this problem. I think us coming together, and I think this was the point that was made by Elizabeth, that allows us to see how interconnected both our aspirations are, and then also by extension, our actions can also be like interconnected as well too. And when that happens, we're going to tap into some synergies that will not only allow us to kind of like solve this problem, but to really unlock like new opportunities and new potentials for the stars, for the US labor market. And then I think more broadly how other societies can think about solving these questions too.
Yeah. And I'm gonna say, before we go into the lightning round of kind of cross-questioning here, I'm going to say what makes me hopeful. First of all, like just building on what Peter just said, I mean, people are actually problem solvers.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There's such a weird, to me, weird kind of narrative, like coming from business where I worked for most of my career, where it's like war for talent and like how do you sort of get at this talent, to then the sort of the policy side of things where it's all like, oh, you know, these poor people, what could they possibly do? Like, but it just like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, people are amazingly curious, creative problem solvers. Like, I mean, I the other day, I remember dropped some papers on the street and 6 strangers suddenly self-organized in less than an instant to all move like in relation to each other's bodies, pick everything up and bring it all together. They weren't paid, they weren't they weren't directed, but stuff like that happens all the time, right? In a funny way, what makes me optimistic is that what's undermining us isn't people and their talent and their instincts and their abilities. What's undermining us is the systems we've overlaid. I mean, we're spending tens of billions of dollars in redundant infrastructure right now to stop people from trying, right? To blind us to like what someone can do. So in other words, do less of that is actually a pretty easy way to start making progress. And if you take away that crutch, right, of these sort of like random degree requirements, I have a great deal of confidence that businesses will figure out better ways to tap into this talent. Because in fact, I think that is, I don't think that's an advantage for business, it's a convenience, but honestly, it's a self-harm because you're missing this talent. I couldn't agree more with what Dan had to say. Like, this is talent, these are competitive assets, and the companies that get this right first will actually start winning. They absolutely will. And if we can get that right, and if we can open up the door to more of this talent, then a lot of the things that people think are a negative thing can become a positive, right? So we think about automation or like AI as a negative, but of course, I think the best use of machine learning is for human learning, right? And if anyone who had some of the skills but not all, most of the skills but not all, could like get that shot, you could use, right? You could use AI to help accelerate their path and to train them and so forth. So, but if you don't let them try, if they can't move forward, then the ROI on an investment like that would be nil. If you train someone with low pedigree to a high level of skill, but then an employer won't consider them, then that kind of public investment in that training will be considered a failed investment. But it's not because the person can't learn. On the contrary. So I think there's a relatively small number of things we could do if we all did them together that would allow us to make tremendous progress. And I'm super excited about that because Opportunity at Work, the role we're playing is precisely to create this sort of utility from a data and a matching and then a scaling standpoint so that all the great work that we're hearing about can actually kind of connect and rise. So I am actually as hopeful now as I've been for, since starting to work on this problem. Okay, so with that said, I am going to be very light touch. It's going to be a free-for-all, so like get ready. Now, seriously, any of you, the rules of the next 15 minutes are if you have a question for someone else, something that you think could help you do your work better or understand something, ask away.
No, Elizabeth.
I have a question for Lashana. As in your position as a shining star, I'm curious about what aspect of the structure that we've been talking about between employers and training providers, hiring process, what was hardest for you? What was the biggest barrier?
For me, the biggest barrier was being told no so much that I didn't believe the very first time I was sitting in MasterCard interviewing that I was actually going to get the job. And I know that seems kind of very plain, but I've talked to a lot of different people. And like I said, at almost every speaking engagement, I talk to people and we have that shared moment where we're just like, okay, I'm finally here. I think I'm being seen, but is it real? Is it real? You know, we've lived in this alternate reality for a very long time that sometimes when the opportunity is presented, you know, and I'm putting myself back in that seat, that you don't exactly know how it's going to turn out anymore. And then you go on in your head and you're like, okay, this will be over within an hour. Let me go back to going to Indeed.com or Monster.com and looking for my job, or go to, back to, in my case, to LaunchCode and say it didn't work out or whatever. But it's not necessarily a sad thing. It's just, it is a barrier to get over. And some people walk out and they say, you know, it didn't happen, I'm not going to get it, and things like that. And I was like, well, first, don't do anything. Wait. You know, wait for them to call you to let you know. But, you know, to be able to get over that first barrier, and then I can actually supplement and say, okay, now the next thing you need to know is that you're interviewing the company as much as they're interviewing you. And then they're like, oh, okay, I actually have some autonomy in this. And I'm like, absolutely. And then you kind of build up from there. But just to kind of get over that first hump. So you may see this star. This star may be, you know, accessible and available and sitting right in front of you. But you might not know that on the other end, they're just like, this is the 700th interview I've been on. So will this person actually see me, or are they here because, you know, maybe I check a box? Maybe, you know, I'm here because it looks really nice for them on paper. Do they actually see the value that I bring to the table?
Yes,
So,
imposter syndrome is
Exactly.
real.
Absolutely.
And I don't think it ever goes
Absolutely.
away. Thank you so much.
Something I wanted to put on the table, and I'll probably direct my question to Dave and Dan, is what could be done internally to companies to, one, clarify like what the correct like pathways are to particular jobs within the companies. I'll give you kind of an example in terms of like, so I run a research lab of about 5 or 6 PhD students, and like whenever they come in, I say, what's your goal? Do you want to go into academia, industry, or whatever? I don't want to set your goal, but once you tell me what your goal is, then we can figure out like how do you navigate this PhD so that you have the skills and the experiences to get where you want to go. And we have 5 years to build that. So it doesn't matter where you are, like as long as you're teachable, we can like get you there, right? And one thing that I want to put on the table is like, what are some like clear ways for us to really say, here are some jobs, here are the skills and the things that you need to get these jobs. And so that way folks as early as like high school can say, I want to be there, here's what I need to go there. So either that means I can get more utility out of knowing exactly what I need to do in college, or maybe I don't need to go to college, and then I know exactly what the certificates are that I can get. Like, can we be more transparent about like what the specific pathways are?
That's great.
That's a great
You want to go first? No.
Sure. It's the right question, and you've put your finger on something that's really hard for even companies that are trying to be serious about seeing clustering of skills and skills as having intrinsic value and being better than a credential just by itself. We are trying to tackle the challenge of how do you connect the skills you need with the next job and the career pathway. We're grappling with that now internally. Part of the way we're seeking to address it is we have stood up an academies program. We have 200 academies, which are classrooms, which are now high tech, through which we have had more than 400,000 associates move over the last 3 years, where they get a range of business training, retail specific training, team and leadership and softer skills training, which is part of the way we have built this upskilling capability. And in that context, we're trying to bring back into that upskilling that goes on during this multi-week training, the identifying the kinds of next jobs that this upskilling will make more credible.
Okay, and if I can interject for a quick second. So how do you split the difference between the needs of the business and then the desires of the individual, right? Because in some sense it could be that as a company we want to fill these specific needs and so we provide these. And then on the other hand, the individual says, I want to go and become X, and what's my pathway to becoming X?
If they're right, you encourage them to do it.
Okay.
No, it's a good question, and David's going to answer it.
It's like Match.com internally. It's like you have to figure out exactly what people want to do and match them to the desires and the pathways that you have open and are trying to actually fulfill. I believe there's actually something that we have with scale here, and Walmart and Accenture are very large organizations, which is great, meaning we have, for Accenture, we're well over 500,000 employees globally. That scale allows us to have the intellect and kind of the data to actually figure out those pathways, I think, that are most suitable, and the adjacencies of the skills to actually get a person into a position to do their best and most meaningful work to them. It might not be the best and most meaningful work to me, their boss, but I need to get an opportunity for them to actually do that. And I think the opportunity that we have here is probably kind of a payback from society of companies our size to actually bring the data of adjacency skills back to some sort of central repository, if I will, to drive that conversation around how those pathways become more universal. And so people can actually not necessarily have to leave a company to go find their spot, but actually find their spot maybe within mobility in their own organization because they see the adjacencies of the skills.
I like where you started it, and I like where you took it, because in a sense, like when we have coordination across all of the industries, in a sense, like your future talent pool is coming from Walmart, its future talent pool is coming from you. And to the extent that you see this as like kind of like trade, you're fine to train up somebody else who might leave your company because somebody else is training someone who's going to be your future employee as well too, right? And so one of my hopes is that we can kind of like elevate the conversation to the point where we're all kind of like coordinating in a very like multi-sector way, so that we're not narrowly looking at talent as this is my bucket, I have this specific need to fill, but it's more how can we promote human flourishing, and when we do that, we have a broader labor market that's more productive for us, but also people are engaging in like a lot more like meaningful work in a directed way.
That's great. Thank you.
That's true. But just to put it out there, if you become an employer, a firm that's seen to be good at training, better at training, that also increases your retention. So we're happy to share our trained up people with others, but the good news is we improve retention by doing that, and we get all of the varied value of that expressing itself throughout the business.
And to what you're saying, I do have a question. One of the things I do with the St. Louis Equity and Entrepreneurship Collective is I basically do the same thing that basically Byron is doing with STARS, but I do that for entrepreneurs, particularly people of color and women-funded businesses. And one of the things that we kind of press on to them is, understand the value of your company, understand the value of what you bring. But that's kind of based off of some certain economic statistics that I'm sure I could bring up, but will be really boring right now. But the whole point is that what do you look for when you're looking for value in a potential employee?
Great question.
The value that I see is I know this sounds really dramatically simple, is really a love of learning.
Okay.
I think that, to your point, actually you made a very, very strong point. Like at MasterCard, you couldn't have learned 75% of what it was, but you actually were able to be in a position to do that upon entry.
Right.
And I think that love of learning isn't something that you just stumble upon a week before your interview. It's a lifelong thing that we actually need to have. Right. And when you have that, and you can see it in people, it becomes not a performance issue.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes something that actually people build careers on. And that allows them to kind of do their best and most meaningful work. So I think that level of learning is the place to go.
Sort of the dignity of work, but there's a corollary, the dignity of learning. And we can't all get the dignity of work right if we're not also affirming that lifelong learning precept that is so important. Can I ask Elizabeth a quick question?
Yeah.
So I'm think out loud if you would, and maybe others will have a thought. This collective action problem, how do we standardize the way we define a quantum of skills that are useful? Sometimes we talk about this in terms of how do we credential, skill sets.
Right.
The faster we can move on standardizing the way we agree on credentialing those skills, the better. What can we do to get our act together faster in that regard, do you think?
It's a great question. I think definitely starting with some definitions. I love the list of that beautiful, colorful chart that Papia showed. Critical thinking, confidence, communication skills. I think starting with what are the key skill sets. I also think that, like you said, really collecting the data on a broader scale. I worry that the folks who we teach and folks like Lashana, those skills aren't necessarily being counted or seen when we're looking at data sets. And I know that to be true. So I think those are two pathways forward. I'm wondering if anyone else has. That's a big question.
I want to build on something that you said, because the example that you gave, Elizabeth, of the mom who was managing a tight budget, that was my mom, right? Single parent, 7 kids. After everything was done, she had $37 a month, and so we had to sell fruits and vegetables on the weekend, even though she was a college professor. And I'm going to leave this conversation thinking about the issue of measurement, right? And Byron, you've raised this several times when we've had our group calls too, in saying what are some of the sectors of the economy where we're not even measuring the skills? Because in our report, we're measuring the skills of people who are seen to be working, right? But what about folks who are engaged in home production, moms and dads who are at home? Can we begin to quantify what are the skills that they're deploying in the rearing of their children, and then create a dictionary or a map between those specific skills and what they could do in the labor market once their kids would be of school age, right? So that's kind of
negotiation, persuasion,
right?
Exactly.
So that's and I wanted to just build
self-restraint.
And I want to build very, very, very gently too, Dave, on the point that you raised, which was about a curiosity of learning, and I'm completely the same way too. So I started my career at Clemson University in South Carolina, and I loved being in a state school because we drew a broad cadre of folks, right? In a way that's very different from how we draw at Harvard, and I love being at Harvard as well too. But in a lot of ways, I often say, is this person teachable? Because if they're teachable, I have 5 years to train them. I don't need somebody to be a quote-unquote star in the traditional sense coming into a PhD program if I have 5 years and if I'm confident in my ability and in the process of my university, right? And so I think something that we ought to be thinking about as well, too, is yes, we should measure quanta of skills, but I think we should also measure quanta of teachability and willingness to persevere through things. Because if somebody is teachable, there's nothing that they can't learn with enough time.
Well said.
And I think that's so hard. So Biteback is also an employer. We have 20 employees, but because we're so small, we do have to often rely upon what did you do in the past? And we will have an interview and maybe we can get a sense of if somebody is teachable. But I think many employers would love some more information on how we can measure it.
Because where that kind of information comes through is in letters of recommendation. So for example, I sit on several admissions committees at Harvard. And if somebody says this person is the best person that I've seen in my life, X, Y, Z, so on and so forth, that means something to me, above and beyond just what the grades are, right? I can look past grades that seem not the highest grades if that person says there's something special about this person, and that gets them kind of in the door. And I don't think we should shy away from that because it's it's hard to measure, it's kind of squishy, right?
That's really helpful.
And two, what that does is it builds up the reputation of the recommender, right? Because if you become known, Elizabeth, as somebody says, you know what, this person, she is amazing. She will learn whatever you put in front of her. I don't have a way of measuring that, but you trust me with this one, and she's going to kick butt. And then they come back to, Elizabeth, I want some more folks like her.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
So we're getting to the moment where the official program says that all these brilliant people like walk away, and then like I sort of tell you a bunch of things, and we have all the answers then. And I just want to, any of you who are like looking forward to that part, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I'm going to change it up. That's not what I'm going to do. Okay, here's what I am going to do, because I've been listening to these questions, and I have some questions too. And my questions are about what, because we are doing some things at Opportunity at Work, not just this report, but the kind of the work we're doing to try to enable this field, which I think speak to a lot of this. But it's been incredibly important, this interaction. We spend a lot of time with employers. We spend a decent amount of time with stars, not as much as I'd like. We spend a lot of time with providers, and increasingly with academics. They can take a lot of your time. They've got a lot of questions.
Good question.
And we've learned a tremendous amount, but I'm learning on this panel. So I'd like to say, look, so Opportunity at Work sees our role in helping to solve this problem in kind of 3 stages or 3 parts. The first you've seen illustrated here, it's part of it here, which is we really need the data, and we've talked about this in a lot of different times, to be able to show both what is the size of the opportunity. I think it's very meaningful that it's 71 million stars, that it's 30 million rising stars, that it's 5 million already out of 16, 18 million people who have these high skills, because scale matters for business. As someone who's worked in business a lot, business can do a little bit of anything at once, and you can do that through corporate social responsibility or whatever. But if you're going to try to move the needle on numbers like this, it needs to be systemic. It needs to be in a workflow, right? It needs to be in business process, and it probably needs to be in software. So that's like we are serious. When we say rewire the labor market for Opportunity at Work, we're not done until at least 1 million stars have kind of gained that. And then at that point, we can hand off to the rest of you, because there's a lot more work than 1 million. But if we can do 1 million, then this field can do the rest. So the first thing is getting the data on both this, as Papio was talking about, the supply side, the origins, like what assets do people have, and there's even more work to do on that. We haven't talked about layering over skills from the gig economy. We've talked about there's many other places where you can get that, and we've talked here mainly about on the job. Of course, there's a lot of bite backs and so forth. There's layering on. So there's more work to do there, and then we've already started working on the demand side of that to say how does that map to sort of skills and jobs. So for example, the jobs that people are hiring for. For example, there is we hear a lot that, these are old jobs, but what about the new jobs? And there's this kind of assumption that if it's a new job, you must have to have like lots and lots and lots of education. But why is that? Yeah. I mean, a new job by definition, you weren't educated. No one was educated for that, right? My father, who dropped out of college after a year, learned COBOL and got a job as a COBOL programmer, and that was our family's path into the middle class. But no one was learning COBOL in college because it was new then, right? So if you want to be a Salesforce administrator, right, I think what we've demonstrated here is that there's a lot of people with those skills. They would need to be trained to be a Salesforce administrator, but guess what? So do college grads. And this is to your point, Lashana. It's the kind of training people need. Everyone's going to need. It's a question of who are you investing in or not. So changing this idea that we should be spending, the businesses should be spending a ton of money to exclude stars talent, instead of like flipping that and spending a little bit of money to go after and like actually get it. That's sort of the first part of it, this thing. The second part, and it relates to some of the things we're talking about, is how then, once a business decides, this is a talent pool that matters, we want to go after it. And in our experience, the first thing they want to know then is how, and it boils down a little bit to this: if we're not going to screen people out because they don't have the pedigree, how are we going to screen people in? We still can't interview 900 people for a job. And you've mentioned a lot of these things. There's sort of definitions of skills, there's assessments, there's programs, right? Just like reputations of universities, there could be reputations of programs like Bite Back or Merit America or Year Up or Perscolis and whatnot. That's a big opportunity. And then, so what we've done though is to say, look, there's not going to be one answer to 70 million people and and 800 jobs. But what you can do is create an actual learning machine, and that's our STARS talent marketplace. So that is to have, and we're starting in Washington, D.C. next month. with Bite Back and Merit America, and soon to expand to others. But to actually say, for employers can say, here's the jobs that we're looking for stars specifically. And employers can say, hey, I want to work with these programs, or I want a Google IT certificate. But what they can also do is say, what are other employers doing, and do that. And so this whole system is designed to to have people learn. And I would love to know, Elizabeth, from your setting, because we've talked about this, how would that system, why are you excited about that?
I mean, it would revolutionize how we place our graduates. It is extremely resource intensive to have to go out and find the right person in each company who's responsible for hiring, convince them to use a different strategy, figure out how to work with their system. I mean, like many providers, we have multiple people on our staff who do just that. That's all they do. And so we're just really excited about the efficiency, about bringing more opportunities to our graduates.
So that's an example. And then the third thing we're doing is thinking about how then can this scale, because we're not thinking that this Stars Talent Marketplace replaces Indeed or LinkedIn or Workday or any of those. But the thought is, you see a lot in job descriptions, bachelor's degree or equivalent. And I don't know what your experience is with that, but usually that or equivalent is something that a committee decided 5 years ago. It's like outmoded. It sometimes doesn't even make logical sense. It's like an impossibility. But what if that or equivalent was actually this dynamic array of solutions that was being generated in the marketplace by the actual process of learning, right? It's like, oh, let me try Bite Back. Oh, okay, I like Bite Back. Or, hey, I need something, I believe in this certificate. Well, it turns out there's all these providers that I've never heard of that actually do provide people with a certificate. That sort of discovery engine, could you plug it in essentially through API integration, right, with these platforms? So we work with these platforms over time, both on the data and to the scale. And from a business standpoint, I'd love to hear this question of scale and workflow, and how much do we need this to be in mainstream hiring tools before this takes off, or mainstream training tools?
From my perspective, a lot of job programs, feel too big, and it almost feels like we got to get local with that. And so what I would say is, from a local pool perspective, the competition that you can derive within a particular community or greater city would be great. For instance, in Minneapolis, I know in Minneapolis-St. Paul, they've got, 12 Fortune 50 companies or Fortune 100 companies there. I'm assuming that would be a great way in that particular geography to create some sort of groundswell of how to actually evaluate what you said is the API component of this, effectively to drive kind of a different talent pool. I think the language that you just described is almost kind of interesting, how we say a BS or BA, BS degree or equivalent. It's like we should rewrite that sentence to be different. And I think that with 12 companies of great size in a particular geography, being able to do that together, that would actually do something. And rather than trying to go U.S. broad with something extremely large, I think the scale could come more locally.
Right. And what's cool about, because I agree, people get hired locally, right? And I think the marketplace is designed that way, but not every local entity should have to develop a whole system of skills identification and so forth. So it's really thinking about what could be done nationally, and then what has to be done locally, that placement, that relationships, these referrals. And then I think the question I would ask then, because the other part of scaling is on the policy side. Because ultimately, what we're seeing is if there are these different pathways for learning, we don't have the same incentives for all of them. We have a whole infrastructure. It's not perfect, but for college degrees, Pell Grant, student loans, et cetera, there's issues with it. But there's a capacity and resources to go through those pathways. Senator Warner talked about the incentives for companies and for their training, talked about expanding to Pell Grants to certified work. So there's all these issues. But if you look at what we've done in this report, there are thousands of pathways, tens of thousands of pathways that are mapped, and you could actually have the ROI for each. And so Business Roundtable, and I know you're working close with them, Dan, if you're talking about stakeholder capitalism, the thing about shareholder value is it's measurable. could there be a measure of what businesses are contributing to raising the value of human capital, which we know accrues mostly to the person? And could that be a measurable way for businesses to really make a difference?
Yes.
Excellent.
No. Amen. So I love every premise in your question. By the way, you are bringing us home. You're wrapping up beautifully. So thank you. How do we take the reformulation of the purpose of a corporation, which Business Roundtable articulated some months back? Yes, Byron, as you rightly note, Doug McMillan, my CEO, is now chairing the BRT. How do we move forward affirming a stakeholder capitalism model where businesses at scale are doing what we do, but where we are really being smart in the way that we're talking with these influential platforms and people who are developing sort of these approaches and systems and tools related to sort of identifying talent, thinking about talent, upskilling. So how do we make sure that we're having the right intense, accelerated conversations with you all at the same time? You know, there's useful work being done now through the American Workforce Advisory Board. There's very important work being done now in the U.S. Congress. You know, may 1,000 flowers bloom, but may you all continue to play a convening role, bringing us together, and let's even work on BRT's agenda as we're thinking about putting meat on the bones of what we mean by stakeholder capitalism.
Thank you. Well, I leave this conversation very excited because I think, look, the fundamental thing here is what you're hearing is that this is not a set of problems and it's not an opportunity we can seize one at a time, right, in isolation, in silos, and it's not something we're likely to solve by accident. But it is something that we could solve together and on purpose. And in doing that, we have a huge advantage in that there are 70 million stars showing up every day, working hard, striving to learn and to contribute. They can do more. They're showing up every day. Our institutions need to show up for them. And I think we made a pretty good start on that today. So thank you very much to all who participated.
Thank you.
Fist bumps, elbow bumps all around. Yeah.